During an interview earlier today with Stephen A. Smith, Bill Maher condemned Donald Trump and MAGA's attacks on free speech, condemned Trump's authoritarianism, and also offered a chilling prediction about the 2026 midterms. And given that Maher was famously one of, if not the first, to predict that Trump would resist a peaceful transfer of power in 2020, we should probably take this very seriously. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, I know to a lot of people, these two men are wildly frustrating, and full disclosure, Bill Maher does very often get on my nerves with respect to his culture war takes, and Stephen A. Smith gets on my nerves even more, much more frequently because of his both sides bullshit. And one thing I got to give Bill Maher credit on is Maher does not really do that. He has always recognized that Donald Trump is objectively worse than any Democrat, no matter how annoyingly woke he finds them, at their very worst. So that's the one major difference between these two men, and why I take Maher much more seriously with respect to political commentary. He was very quick to predict a lot about Donald Trump and his authoritarian impulses, and Stephen A. Smith tends to be a bit of a weather vane. And if he's talking to Bill O'Reilly, he's more conservative. If he's talking to Bill Maher, he's a bit more liberal. That said, I do want to play you some clips from this interview because when Bill Maher makes a prediction, I think it's worth paying attention to.
Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel for the Democratic Party for 2026 or 2028? My last question to you.
I think they can win those elections. I don't think the right, as long as they appear nutty to the right, and there is a lot of nutty on the far left, as long as they appear that way to those Republicans, it doesn't matter if they win the election. The right is not going to give up power. Wow. That's my prediction. I mean, they've already shown they are perfectly comfortable with Trump still has not conceded the 2020 election.
Right.
You know, it's, as Stalin said, it's not who wins the most votes, it's who counts the votes. And so if the right still thinks that the left is an existential threat to this country because they want to rewrite all the rules of human nature and then have nobody debate them, yeah, I don't think it matters if the Democrats win. The Republicans will just find a way to say, no, actually, that's not going to happen.
And you're actually right, because years ago you said that Trump wasn't going to walk away easily.
Yeah.
He was going to fight. You called it before anybody else
Yeah.
did. And you've also pointed out that, and Gavin Newsom has now jumped on that bandwagon. They think he's going to try to circumvent the 22nd Amendment, courtesy of Steve Bannon and others, circumvent the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution. Yeah. And he's going to stay after 2028 in some capacity. So all of that is stuff that we could get into at a later date.
So that's pretty chilling. Now, obviously, Bill Maher is not a prophet, and every prediction he makes does not come true. He initially expected that Donald Trump was going to lose the 2024 election. He started to walk it back over time. But again, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that he's a soothsayer or that he's clairvoyant, but I do think that when it comes to the very real cynicism that has permeated this country, Bill Maher is a fairly good temperature gauge for that. And I agree. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the fact that it's a greater than 0% chance that Republicans would try to prevent Democrats from taking office in the 2026 midterms or the 2028 presidential election, because remember, JD Vance, the vice president, will be presiding over the 2028 election as he's presumably running for it. He said famously during the 2024 election that had he been in Vice President Mike Pence's position on January 6, 2021, that he would not have certified President Biden's victory. So he's admitted, yes, I'm happy to steal an election for Donald Trump. Now, some will say, well, that's why Republicans and Democrats who are sane, work together to beef up the Electoral Count Act so as to reduce, the loopholes, the quote unquote loopholes of the vice president unilaterally deciding elections. Well, those really weren't there to begin with. And those are words on paper, and they have the Supreme Court on their side. So I don't think you can rule it out. I appreciate the fact that Bill Maher is making this case to somebody like Stephen A. Smith, again, who is even much more so than Maher, an enlightened centrist, who again is inclined to just follow the, political whims of whoever he happens to be talking to at the time. Again, if he's in a conversation with Chris Cuomo and Bill O'Reilly in particular, he beats up on the Democrats much more likely than he is when he's talking to Bill Maher. But even Stephen A. Smith is persuaded by this. Like, yeah, Trump does not give up power. He's proven it in the past. Like, unlike President Washington and every other president before Trump, And after, because President Biden conceded and walked away from power, as did Kamala Harris, Trump is uniquely predisposed to not do that, which means you can't rule it out in the future. And that's objectively worse than any Democrat. It just is. It just is objectively worse than any Democrat. And so I think Bill Maher is right to have serious concerns about this, which are also shared, of course, by Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom, as Stephen A. Smith, points out. Here's another clip.
How did you feel about Trump's reaction to Jimmy Kimmel being pulled off the air, and his reaction? I mean, when Charlie Kirk got assassinated, the first words that came out of Trump's mouth is that it was the left. And obviously, when Jimmy Kimmel said what he said, Trump wanted him pulled off the air, even though it was the FCC chairman that really went about the business of making threats along those lines. What were your thoughts about all of that?
Unsurprised. I mean, come on, Donald Trump's been on the stage a long time. You always know he's going to go 100 miles an hour in that direction. You know, he is an actor who commits to the part. Man, does he talk about actors, as long as we're on that.
That's right.
He commits to the part. Do I think he believes a lot of this stuff? I do not. But when he gets on the public stage, he only goes one place at one speed, all the way to the end, as fast and hard as he can. So, of course, that's what he's going to say. And, of course, it's very wrong. And, of course, we're tilting toward autocracy if we're not already there. And, I mean, their hypocrisy on free speech on the right is just breathtaking. The way we went just like the snap of a fingers to they were defending it. And again, if you read Charlie Kirk's own statements about free speech, it's exactly what I have always believed. I was never a believer in the concept of hate speech or hate crimes. Those are thought crimes. A crime is a crime. And, you know, we shouldn't be looking into people's minds.
So I appreciate his consistent condemnation of free speech censorship by the Trump administration as well, because it is something that the Trump administration has been aggressively pursuing. We've just never seen an overtly censorious regime like the Trump administration in modern American history. And after the attempt failed and Jimmy Kimmel was ultimately put back on the air, Trump doubled down on his threats and, again, basically made it clear that he's going to make more aggressive attempts to censor Jimmy Kimmel and others as well. And I appreciate the exposure of the hypocrisy there because, of course, to most MAGA Republicans and to most, I should say, MAGA Republicans in power and influence, it was never about principle in the first place. It was simply about taking power and wielding power against your political opponents in a very cruel and vindictive way. So again, appreciate Bill Maher being very clear-eyed about this, that the right are hypocrites and that Donald Trump is engaging in autocratic censorship. Again, a lot of other people try to downplay or, launder and sanitize what Trump did, even those who criticize him. Well, I shouldn't have said that, that was inappropriate. No, it was autocratic censorship, and we should be deeply concerned. One more clip.
But I will ask you this. When you look at Trump and some of the things that he says, what are you more concerned about in this day and age, Bill? Is it how the right feeds off of what he says, or is it how the left reacts to what he says? What has you more concerned at this particular moment in time as we just purview the landscape, look at our country and the state of affairs that's going on around here?
Well, I love it that you always like what you were just saying before I came on about free speech, and you said, well, let's be honest, the left sort of courted this a little bit because they weren't exactly champions of free speech. So you always have to look at that. I mean, I know that the woke people don't like it that I do that, and maybe they don't like it that you do it either, but that is the reality. And I think we should all do it a lot more, is just be honest about both sides. I mean, what worries me about Trump the most is that the same people who have been saying for a very long time, oh, Bill, you're so alarmed about Trump. He just says a lot of stuff. He talks a lot. Well, now he's doing it. Let's get real. The talked a lot of stuff that phase is over. He just fired the person who was investigating Letitia James, right? And Comey and Adam Schiff, and certainly in the James case, just said, yeah, I looked into it. This is the mortgage fraud, a made up, your tail light is out kind of crime. And And he said, there's not enough evidence to proceed. Trump fires him and puts in his mole lawyer now. I mean, this is just, this is it. This is not talking about it. You're doing this. You are actually not just talking about weaponizing the Justice Department to punish your political enemies. You're doing it.
So again, I appreciate that. Again, Bill Maher frustrates me because, again, I know he's much more centrist than I am, much more centrist than I like him to be. And when it comes to culture war nonsense, he's much too sympathetic to right-wing talking points. But I appreciate that even as he's criticizing what he calls the far left, he goes out of his way to, again, explain that Donald Trump is worse and that Trump is actually humiliating the people who are trying to defend it by saying, oh, it's just talk. Well, just talk from the president of the United States actually counts for something. It matters. But number two, it's not just talk, because Trump is actually following through and making decisions within the Justice Department that will lead to the prosecution of his political opponents. And that's a weaponized justice system, the likes of which we've simply never seen, certainly not from the Biden administration or the Obama administration. And again, I like that sort of clarity coming from somebody who's otherwise a centrist. And again, to me, it's like the real juxtaposition there between somebody like Bill Maher and somebody like Stephen A. Smith, who is nowhere near as forceful in his condemnation of Trump or consistent in the face of somebody like Bill O'Reilly or Chris Cuomo as I wish he would be. So interesting interview. I appreciate that Bill Maher is getting that out to Stephen A. Smith's massive audience. Like, hey, no, listen, whatever your beefs are with the Democrats, Donald Trump and the Republicans are objectively worse, and you shouldn't pretend that the two sides are the same. We'll see what happens in the meantime, but let me know what you think in the comments.